one of the properties that we see that's exciting about fully on-chain games is this idea of composability. And I think a prerequisite for people to, contribute to your games is, having a little bit better tooling, right? Now, I think when I came into starting to build on-chain games, it's been a massive change since then. I mean, things are getting better. We've got great tooling now, and it's only going to get better. And that's one of the things that we're working on, right? Because we want to take this, excitement from, we kind of leaned a little bit to the right in the last 5 years or last 10 years, I guess, where we went to these kind of full service oriented games, things like World of Warcraft, where, basically the contribution was taken away. And we saw sparks of contribution and composability with, Minecraft and Roblox. But the promise of these fully on-chain games is that anyone can contribute, anyone can own, anyone can remix. And that's like super exciting about building on-chain games.
Style podcast.
So welcome to the Deus Ex Style podcast. Today we're talking about on-chain games, and it's actually our second episode about the topic. The first one was released a couple of months ago already, and Dara was joined by Jekyll from Delphi Digital, who gave us an introduction to what fully on-chain games are. So basically, if you have no knowledge about the topic yet, I recommend you check that out. That episode first. Today we focus on game engines for fully on-chain games, and I'm happy to have assembled an all-star team for that. So we have Sebastian from Paima, Matt from Proof of Play, Jerome from Cometh, and Nico from Bitkraft, who's bringing us the investor perspective today. And your hosts are Akina and me, the only one who has their camera off. Maybe let's start with a short round of intros first, and maybe Sebastian, you can go first and then nominate just the next person.
Hey, I'm Sebastian. I'm one of the co-founders of Paima Studios. We're a framework for building on-chain games as well as a studio building on-chain games. We published 4 games to mainnet already, and we recently deployed Trochi, which is our on-chain RPG, to testnet as well. So we're building games as well as infrastructure that's open on GitHub for people to build games using our stack as well. Maybe I'll pass it over to Jerome from Cometh.
Hello, guys. I'm Jerome. I run a company called Cometh, which has 2 activities. We have a game studio called Cometh Game Studio that did a couple of games already. One of them being in early 2021, one of the first fully on-chain game going into the mainnet of Polygon. Since then, we've been working on a second game that's going to be out in the next few weeks on Epic Game Store, and it's on L3, called Cosmic Battle. On the side, we create different middlewares and infrastructure pieces for mostly for onboarding, actually. We like to explore various ways of putting the games fully on-chain.
My name is Nico. I am an investor on the Web3 side of Bitkraft. Bitkraft is a early stage gaming focused fund. We invest both in the Web2 gaming world and the Web3 gaming world. We made our first investment in the fully on-chain gaming space 2 years ago now. That was a company called Playment, and have been very close to the space ever since. I'm very excited to be here, mostly to learn from the big brains here. I'm going to try to add whatever I can, whenever I can. And excited to learn more. And I'll pass it to Matt.
All right. Lucky last, I think. But I'm Matt. I work at Proof of Play. I'm the head of engineering here. I have a traditional gaming background, so you can probably see in the background some of the games that I worked on. Probably the biggest game I worked on was a game called League of Legends. Super excited by on-chain games, especially the permanence of them and the composability. We make a game called Pirate Nation. It's been around since basically a year now. We launched when FTS crashed, which was a fun time to launch.
Nice one.
But we launched with essentially nothing. And we saw some really interesting properties of people playing on-chain games. And so we like to launch a feature basically every week. We have 52 weeks up, 52-week releases. So it's been a fun time to build so far.
Nice. So For our listeners, you can see that we have a good round together. So maybe to get started, let's just ask, like, why are you building engines, or Nico, for you, like, why are you interested in game engines?
Yeah, sure. So we're super interested in trying to get to building on-chain games. So we've seen the growth of the modular stacks in cryptos. There's no longer really like one monolithic chain that does everything, and people are building really specific stacks for specific goals. DA layers, CK layers, FHE layers. Someone recently talked to me about a network that's just for time lock encryption. That's all they do, right? And so we've seen this like expansive growth of modular stacks, and these are really interesting as game developers because you're seeing all this technology come out. And you're like, oh, like I want to use this, I want to use this, but there's no way you could possibly have a single engineer like learn all these stacks. It's just not possible. And we thought there's gonna be like a lot of value in having this kind of like gaming stack that abstracts us away from the game developers, so they can leverage the different stacks they need for their game and just have the single programming language that they write in and have a unified view for all these different layers together. And so that's been our goal at Paima Engine, to not only like write this engine but also build games using this engine as well. Maybe Matt, you want to go next?
Yeah, and feel free to jump in afterwards, Jerome, or jump in the middle if you want to debate. But I mean, for me, it's, one of the properties that we see that's exciting about fully on-chain games is this idea of composability. And I think a prerequisite for people to, contribute to your games is, having a little bit better tooling, right? Now, I think when I came into starting to build on-chain games, it's been a massive change since then. I mean, things are getting better. We've got great tooling now, and it's only going to get better. And that's one of the things that we're working on, right? Because we want to take this, excitement from, we kind of leaned a little bit to the right in the last 5 years or last 10 years, I guess, where we went to these kind of full service oriented games, things like World of Warcraft, where, basically the contribution was taken away. And we saw sparks of contribution and composability with, Minecraft and Roblox. But the promise of these fully on-chain games is that anyone can contribute, anyone can own, anyone could remix. And that's like super exciting about building on-chain games. Jerome, I see you jumping in.
Yeah, I think what you both mentioned is what I like to put under the hood of on-chain as metagame. Like you consider what's the whole composability service and the history of the players, the different tokens that they own, the different experience that they had, the different services that are laying around, and how you can involve them into building up on top of your games. So that's definitely a trend that we observe all around the small on-chain game industry, but ever growing since the I think since the year 2020. We've seen massive growth in this kind of narrative. On the side, what motivated us is using gaming blockchain tools for financialization of the games. When players are seeking economic superiority of one game against another, or a true social experience about what an economy is inside the game, at Cometh, we kind of felt like blockchain is kind of the perfect medium for this, with an economic layer that's superior in various ways to the state of Web2 games. One of the examples I like to say is like if you were to craft an armor mixing iron and leather, having the recipe for the armor being an LP from iron to leather allow you to have a dynamic recipe with the amount of leather and iron that is circulating in your game. So there's many things you can add into the financialization of your game from a virtual economy standpoint to make the gaming experience feel more real and feel more participative and feel more transparent from the player's perspective. And overall, when you combine all of those meta games and hyper-financialization, you end up with what I call the third hood of blockchain gaming, which is autonomous world. Having your game being fully autonomous from its creators, from any potential servers or potential point of failure. Like the game is ever running because it has a blockchain as a backend, and that's a huge promise. But when we first stepped into the blockchain gaming space, we were just a bunch of blockchain engineers passionate with games, and then just wanted to see how we could bring more people into playing with blockchain, not playing games per se. Like we wanted to find what could bring people into blockchain, and DeFi and speculation was a powerful magnet for a lot of people. But we wanted to see something and to make something that was more retail focused, something that will justify the technology by itself and not just by transfer of values. And since then, well, as you said, like the whole tooling was pretty much in existence 2 years ago. Now we have a lot of things that we had to build as a different company playing around in the field, but also that a lot of things that are getting more mature, and that's really cool to see happening.
It's really interesting with the financialization stuff you mentioned. I mean, I think we saw the explosion with just royalties as a use case, but in games, obviously, there is like thousands of other ways to explore that. And so that's going to be really exciting and see how different pieces interconnect.
Yeah. One thing I've heard about, like general, how to frame it, like interoperability of assets. Like when we had the first backlash with companies like Ubisoft trying to revive not so well performing licenses with we're going to put blockchain into this, and suddenly people just start to say NFTs are evil, you should not do it, and so on and so forth. I've been trying to listen to various traditional gaming podcasts about professionals talking about this thing, and a lot of them were like, oh, you cannot have you cannot use my IP into your game. It's not right. Like we don't want you to give composability. It's not the right way to do it. This utility is just flawed. Nobody wants that. So I guess sure, if you have Mario playing in Elden Ring, that doesn't sound so cool. But if you have Mario rendered in the Elden Ring engine from a graphic perspective with a cool medieval armor, like it makes total sense, and it makes me want to buy a Mario NFT. So like and at some point I feel this kind of anti-interoperability and also like restriction on I don't want it to be too much of a variable and too much good looking in various games. It's going to fall because of the royalty aspect and of the ask from the players, like being able to use your history as a gamer elsewhere. It's a super powerful value proposition in my opinion.
The IP thing's really interesting to explore because I think there's obviously the optimistic use case of like, hey, I want to have Mario in my game. But then there's the pessimistic use case of like, hey, what if like it's been taken and it's being used for something that's, not appropriate, especially for us. Like we're trying to make assets that are, following Nintendo's lead, like age appropriate for everyone. Anyone can play, whether what age they are. But like, we don't have any systems to figure out like, hey, what is the appropriate place for your IP to fit in, and what are the controls for that? And I think that's going to be something that we'll see come around. Like we've seen some trends, like, the Milady community is a really interesting one to look at. Like, how do we solve that problem?
Yeah, and I think for games, like there's going to be kind of a trade-off between how much sovereignty do you want and how much composability do you want. Obviously, the more composability you give, the more you can integrate with other systems. But a lot of times for games, you want to maintain some level of sovereignty about, what assets people can bring in, about how fast you can do the updates, this kind of system. And so, having sovereignty does not necessarily mean taking it off chain. You can still have something off chain, but keep sovereignty about like how things compose together. And so, I mean, for us, especially at Paima, like what we're super interested in is, trying to like allow composability while also allowing game developers to opt to have sovereignty on different parts of their game, and they can choose like which part of their game they give up. And I think it's especially useful for like people coming in trying to build stuff. So oftentimes like building stuff to be composable is like really hard and really expensive. So it doesn't come for free. And so a lot of times, like when you're iterating on a game, you need to iterate as fast as possible to get product market fit. And so you want to just like have as much sovereignty as possible, iterate as fast as possible. And like once you have a certain product market fit, you have some good feedback, you can start like making your game more and more composable. Because realistically, nobody cares about integrating your game unless it's good, right? You care about integrating other people's stuff, but mostly you care about like unidirectional until your game is good. Then people want to integrate with your stack. And so giving people that flexibility to like start decentralized, but with sovereignty and moving that more and more towards composability. So I think it's going to be something that's going to be really interesting.
On that point, Sebastian, do you feel like the same applies to engines? I mean, what's the point of building an engine if no one's using it? Like, do you still see that chicken and egg problem?
I mean, if you look at the engines right now, basically everybody's building their own games. At Paima Studios, we're building our own games. Obviously, Dojo's building their own games. Lattice is building their own games. So I think at this point, like everybody's aware that the market is like not, at its peak yet. And a lot of people who are interested in building games are primarily doing this as a hobby project right now. It's up to the engines to kind of lead that. So if you look at like the top on-chain games by player counts, they're also like typically all built by the engines. So I think the engines definitely have a role to be trailblazers, as well as if you look at everybody on this call, what they said. One thing we're all kind of passionate about is retail, building stuff for retail as opposed to necessarily for enterprise or like B2B stuff. And so I think like, for us as engines also to like, be able to build this infrastructure but still have it like be real heavy as like a target audience is also like kind of an interesting mix.
So I have a question. I know that Paima is very much building an engine on purpose and wants to commercialize it. I was not aware of Proof of Play or Cometh doing that. Could you guys elaborate? I'm assuming you're building something for your own needs. Is the goal to ultimately commercialize that?
Matt, you want to go first, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, we're building one out of necessity, right? When we started building, Mud wasn't around and other engines weren't around. And even still, I think the engines are still pretty primitive of what they're doing. And so for us, I mean, in every game that I've worked on, we've had to kind of do that. Like even at Riot, like we ended up purchasing an engine and then heavily customizing it. And so I think we're that early that potentially for us, like going out and just building an engine and trying to market it would be pretty crazy. I think that we still need to figure out what we're trying to build. Our strategy around engine is very much like, hey, if we build a great game and then people want to use the technology that we've built, then we'll consider using that and like productizing it, but it's not our primary goal. Our primary goal is definitely build a great game that drives, player adoption.
Yeah, on our end, we are extremely happy that other people are building engines and tackling these extremely hard problems. We did a couple of hackathons on using different engines, like the Mud if Global hackathon notably, and things like that. And we worked on various projects around Mud. I know less the architecture of Paima and Curio and others. But I recognize how much of a heavy lifting in terms of engineering works it is. In our case, I like to compare the state of Onchain games as the history of civil flights. You start with small planes that just float, and then you start to run a rotor and a fan in a way to move a bit forward, and then you start to tackle super hard problems like aerodynamics, like being able to push sufficiently high with the jets and so on and so forth. And I'm crazy about following what's the progress on those different engines. But when it comes to building a game that can live only on chain, we try to stick to the minimum in terms of game design, so that the game can properly work on its own. This is a challenge because if you were to just imagine your own physics system, your physics engine, the persistence of your world, and so on and so forth, you start to end up in a complete framework where you need something much bigger, and you say like, okay, let's stop building the game and start building the thing. Our initial game was just one smart contract saying like we have trajectories of the spaceship that are circles. Simple. Okay, we track the position of the spaceships with the clock of the blockchain. Okay, and now let's create something that a function that we can call so that the ship can move. And that was pretty much it. So you just jump from one trajectory to another trajectory at a specific time and space, and that's it. And we created a game loop around that. So you imagine that's really not many things that you put on chain, and still it needed about 10 different smart contracts that were hard to maintain, that were hard to evolve, hard to add features on, and you were oftentimes afraid to break something, and then you had to build an indexer on top of it to make it seamless from the front end perspective. So I totally understand the allure of going full engine. Like, okay, let's start with the engine and find something that's modular enough and that's practical enough, so we can build on top of and evolve it. From a company perspective, we are we are super excited and passionate about building games, like from the game studio side, and we try to find good loops on small thing. We have our dreams and ambition to do something much bigger, but we wait for the underneath technology to be much more mature, and we commercialize middlewares that are for onboarding, because we know that's where the games are struggling the most. Like making sure that your game is at least as easy to use as a Web2 game it's paramount if you want to get out of the Web3 niche, and that's what where we put most of our blockchain engineering efforts right now.
I would like to dive deeper. Oh, yeah, sorry. Continue first. Yeah.
Yeah, like I said, for Paima Studios, we're building games ourselves. Right now, we probably spend like 4 engineering hours on infrastructure for every 1 engineering hour on the game development. So it shows that, like, although you can build games, we, publish multiple games live, like, it's still very much like infrastructure heavy, as an ecosystem at this point. But to continue to your point, like, one of the really amazing things has been that a lot of other like middleware providers have gotten really interested in like connecting to the like on-chain game ecosystem. So we have like, a lot of these companies like reached out to us and like, hey, like we'd like to integrate with your game engine, like how we can work together. And at Paima Studios, we cannot possibly solve every problem out there. And so, one of the awesome things about working kind of like in a retail space, it allows you to, more easily work with, all these different other companies in the crypto ecosystem, and, do this as like a, joint project in a sense with everybody else in crypto, and not necessarily just for Paima, its companies are also, talking to Dojo and Lattice and all these other projects out there as well. And we're all kind of like, working together to that goal of like this kind of integrations for games.
Yeah, I'd like to dive deeper into what the engines are actually supposed to do. Like, for example, what are like the must-have components and the nice-to-haves, like an indexer, for example, right? Or providing games with like a stable tick rate, stuff like that. Could you explain, like, each of you, like, how do you see this and how do you handle that?
Well, if you're building on Polygon in the early days, like handling indexing is paramount. So for the people that are listening and don't know what indexing is, your game has a front end, like you're showing graphics, and people are looking at what's happening in your game from a screen, basically. But your game has to your stack, your technical stack has to communicate with what's happening on the chain and render that in the front end. So you're constantly listening to what's happening in the different smart contracts that are your game, essentially, and caching those events somewhere that you can efficiently query and render in your front end. And that's what indexing is at large. It's listening to blockchain events, ordering them in a database that can be queried and then used for front-end purposes or update purposes and information to the end users or to different middlewares. The fact that we are on the chain is that we have to rely on a shared database as the base layer, and the shared database can have hiccups in how it is updated. Like for example, it's not too much too rare. It's actually pretty common sometimes in certain blockchain that you have different blocks that are competing against each other at a certain heights. For block n, you have n prime, and so on. And after 2 or 3 blocks, like it's n prime at 1, so that's n prime that gets canonical. But when you are trying to feed the data to your players in real time in the graphic interface, you have to understand those kind of hiccups and make sure that you are showing the data that is canonical, because sometimes players have to make a decision to attack, withdraw, Byzantine problem, basically. And the more you have noise on the block history, the harder it is. And also the less reliable your RPC endpoint, the way you listen to the blockchain, the less this endpoint is reliable, the harder it is to index. And the more you have a complexity in your smart contracts, the more things you have to order and listen to. So public blockchain is kind of hard to index and kind of hard to follow. But we have more ease on doing that on rollups because of the unicity of the sequencing aspect of rollups. We can listen to the rollup and make sure that we listen to the sequencer and have a good history. And overall, it's also an hard architecture problem. I let Matt and Sebastian discuss about what they prefer between Kafka and stuff and so on to manage the different listeners. But it's a struggle to find something that scale right and doesn't consume much DevOps and resources.
Oh man, Kafka, throwing me back because we use that extensively. It's a good analogy, right? Like blockchain is an event queue. I mean, I think when you're taking an approach to building an engine, you have to let the game development inform the engine development. It's all good to talk about indexes and like how we want to arrange the data for the client, but that's going to change from game to game, right? Like if you wanted to have a first-person shooter, then having extremely fast, low latency, essentially like close range data between peers that potentially is resolved on the blockchain, maybe a pattern that is very different to, say, a card game where you have pretty easy set rules and you want players to see certain information. And so I think that we are discovering, and we're all kind of discovering at the same time, different things that we are trying to solve. And if I had a crystal ball, I could not tell you what the major problem we'll be solving in 9 months from now is. I could kind of look at like, hey, these are the problems that all of the teams in the space are solving. These are some of the approaches that people are taking. And a lot of us are coming up with similar approaches. I know, Seb, you were talking about like, we have a similar mirroring approach and things like that. But I think, again, like the approach to game development as a general is like figure out from the player first what you want to achieve, and then figure out how to wrangle, all of these cool decentralized things that we want to, give players ownership for, and let that inform your development.
Yeah, I mean, from our experience talking to projects, there's usually 4 key points that they're looking for. One is, of course, being able to actually build their game. Like, it can't be too hard. They have to be able to like come and actually build it, and notably build it cheaply. Like a lot of the people who are getting into game development, not just in Web3, but just Web2 as well, they're like, students or like, people just like trying to like build something, and they don't have like a large budget to build like a AAA experience. So being able to like do it at like a cheap price point is super important for games as well. So easily, cheaply. The second one is like building safe. Like especially a lot of NFT projects are looking into gaming. They're looking at like all these projects that are like mooning based off their, game. And they're like, oh man, like I want a game for my NFT project as well. People are like really scared of building anything on chain because of the risk of hacks. And so this has been like number 2 concern. Number 3 is onboarding users. People are scared of like not getting enough users for this game. So engines being able to like guarantee a easier user onboarding is super important. And I think last one is iterating. Like for games, like they feel like a lot of the Web3 games right now, they basically like ship once and it's over. It's just like too hard to wrangle like 20 slidey files, and it's just not worth it. So you just ship and then you move on. But I think like, for games to have like a longer lifespan, being able to like iterate fast on these is super important. And that's something that's still really hard in this space.
I'm curious for Sebastian and Matt specifically on indexing. Have you guys considered having your players install a node? We're doing local indexing. You install a node, guys.
Yeah, so for Paima engine, the way it works is basically as a game developer, you write a state machine in JavaScript. And then that state machine is basically like the game node. And so you can, upload your state machine to wherever you want, and then people can run their own game nodes. So Paima, although it's a layer 2 framework, it's not like a centralized layer 2. Anybody who wants to run their own game node can spin up the game, hydrate the entire game state. And you can even run like your own batcher. So if you want to like have people submit game inputs to through you instead of like the official like RPC for the game, anybody can spin this up. So we put a lot of thought into trying to make it like not centralized, so anybody can just like run the game themselves.
Running your own node for a client seems pretty crazy. I think like holding the whole state of the chain. Like if you're on a bespoke chain, it may make sense. I think really realistically, we have to look about what information does the person want and from that game, right? Like obviously there's some static information about themselves, the world, and then there's more information pertaining to them, and then there's information pertaining to things they access. Like, maybe they go and interact with another player. You want to know about their inventory and their things they know about. So I think that the RPC kind of node design is not optimal for that. And I think we need to, as a industry, come together and figure out ways to design for the player access patterns that we're trying to come together and see. And we're seeing that, right? Like indexes are starting to pop up that will allow that, and we're iterating on that.
I mean,
related to this, like,
go ahead, please.
I've seen like a lot of projects come in and try and handle this by shipping their Solidity contracts with like EVM TS, or like having the EVM run locally in their browser to do optimistic updates. And I've seen also a lot of companies just give up on that approach. So it's kind of like optimistic update system to like have people run contracts in their browser to not have to wait. It's like a super hard problem, and I don't think anybody has like a really perfect solution for this. And I think more like broadly, like not just our optimistic updates, like kind of an unsolved problem right now. A lot of people are tackling it. Just anything that has to do with player versus environment as well. Like we obviously like there's PvP battles in games that's important, but also there's a lot of stuff like player versus environment. Like you're fighting an NPC in the game, and how do you make that work really well? Because if you're playing against the environment, it's not necessarily a need to sync on chain, but it still needs to be provable. And so I think there's a lot of like startup opportunities in that domain that nobody's really addressing, and everybody like is kind of struggling on these points.
So I've recently had a chat with a traditional Web2 company, a Web2 gaming company that were starting to build up their next game and wanted to introduce a Web3 aspect inside of it. And they have a client a game client that you install, because the game is an online game. And they were like, oh, so we picked this technology for the wallet, and we are going to generate a wallet at the installation phase, and then blah, yeah, let's go. Then we started to chat a bit more, and they're like, yeah, we wanted to be on our own chain at some point. So like, well, what about putting a node of the chain inside the install? Because like, why not? And I think it's a nice idea if you're on a dedicated app chain. Supposedly, you're not producing blocks when nobody's playing, so that's fine. And you get
that depends on which chain you chose. So I think I know what chain you chose based on that. I think the problem is the state, like the RAM requirements for state are crazy for that. Like I think you're going to end up dishing a lot of RAM to your clients. I mean, I don't know. Yeah. I guess if you're targeting like users that have a lot of RAM, it should be fine.
Yeah, and also like if you start to do some online, if you're using online gaming capacity like GeForce Now and so on, you get that's also feasible, but more from a gaming experience perspective. Like let's say you are on a game that is a builder's game, like you're building a bigger and bigger city. You've been offline for 2 days. You are starting up the game, and so you need like 30 minutes to sync, and the 30 minutes where you're getting sync, you're like, oh my goodness, Matt has built this big train. Oh, and Sebastian, he has now an airport. Oh my goodness. Like you see things pop in and like, oh, you're in sync. Let's go. That's a cool experience.
Maybe we can go further, guys, into the technical aspect of the blockchain infrastructure. What are your thoughts about the different approach and trade-off of horizontal scaling, for example, EVM component, or building at Cosmos? What are your thoughts about this different approach of fully on-chain gaming infrastructure?
Yeah, it's obviously like a really complex problem. Like I think maybe to tie into the discussion we just had, like for example, if you like you're deploying your game to a public network, obviously there's a bunch of transactions unrelated to your game also coming up, and if your game has to synchronize everybody's transactions, even when it's unrelated to your games, to the full state, like this can be really slow. And so people are really inspired by like the idea of like data availability sampling, these kinds of things that DA layers do. This is really hard to combine with games because games also need like passive time and tick rates and all this kind of stuff, and it's hard to combine all this together. And so trying to like leverage these different components together is basically what we spend almost all our time on at Paima Engine. It's trying to figure out how we can have DA layers work together with layers for settlement, with layers for ZK, with layers for all these things, and trying to combine this together is very much a non-trivial problem.
Yeah, for me, the ZK related layer 2s are extremely interesting and full of very high potential. I don't consider them mature enough for what we want to do on our end right now. I will have another look and think about it for our next game, definitely. Related to EVM stuff, we kind of realized with our first experience on Polygon POS back in the days that when you have a game that's fully on-chain, that's attracting, let's say, 10K players that are regularly playing, not on an hourly basis, but just on a daily basis, like the cost of transaction becomes so high that well, you have to provide an extremely good experience to your players, or you have to pay them to continue playing. So it makes a very strong case for having your own chain if you are considering having more than 10K players, and call your favorite roll up as a service to know how much they will charge you and what they will propose to you, and that can be really good. Like, consider it. On our end, we have chosen to build our next game on top of its own rollup, an Arbitrum based. Well, it's Arbitrum Orbit, anchoring on Arbitrum 1, so technically a layer 3 on Arbitrum 1, and it's going to benefit from the Stylus upgrade that is running WASM on parallel of the EVM. So it's really a shortcut to say we have access to another VM to do crazier stuff and crazier stuff and still keep it on chain. So at first the game won't be fully on chain. It will be later on when we have the Stylus upgrade and be able to execute the games between players inside WASM and port the results in the EVM. And that's I think that's a good segue between having a super resilient and adapted engine to use from the get-go fully EVM and relying on this shortcut for now. But again, the maturity of the technology, even if we think optimistic are a little bit better right now, we still have to wait a lot for the upgrade to be there, for the thing to be there, and so on and so forth. And you get to be dependent on the update that will come from other talented teams and talented company that are trying to ship something that doesn't break when you launch it. And I'm afraid I don't know much about how the Cosmos ecosystem and its core works, so I will not comment on that.
I feel like I do a deep dive on this every couple of months, right? And you almost have to put your investor hat on. So Nico, I would love after my answer for you to give me like your point of view on it. But for a lot of it, we're trying to focus on portability because I think there are so many teams in the space that are trying to solve this scalability problem that you want to be ready to use the one that has the breakthrough and wins out. Obviously ZK is kind of up in the air, but there could be one mathematical breakthrough and then all of a sudden it's like, ready to use, right? I think the key here is to keep an eye on what's happening in the space. We haven't achieved horizontal scalability, which I think is kind of a prerequisite for a mass market game. And there are teams trying to grapple with that. There are teams trying to grapple with like getting the most juice out of it, like things that are, pulling in ref and rewriting the state. And so I think the right answer here is to act like a VC and kind of like sit back, watch all of the teams and make key investments in your time to, not focus all of your time on fixing a problem that everyone else is. Nico, what's your thoughts on like the teams building chains and scalability and what have you seen in terms of trends?
I think I'd echo what you said there at the end. It's really difficult to take a stance right now because we don't know how this technology will evolve. What I've observed from the investor side of things within the fully on-chain gaming space is that there's quite a bit of appetite for engines. And my thesis for that is that a lot of the investors in the space are crypto native investors who don't feel comfortable making content bets. And so they tend to see engines as a sort of shotgun approach, which essentially de-risks content risk, right? If you invest in an engine on which 100 games are built and, only a handful of those games become wildly successful, then you get the profits, hopefully, from that success. Versus having to pick those 5 becomes pretty hard. And so that's why we've actually seen quite a few very successful, I would say, and pricey rounds over the past couple of years within the space, specifically for fully on-chain gaming engines. As at Bitkraft, given that we are gaming investors at heart, we feel more comfort to take content bets, which means that we don't necessarily have to pay up to do engine investments. And so we have not yet made a engine dedicated investment, but we've seen that there is some interest, and we're happy to sit back for the moment and see how things evolve with different technologies. I think a bunch of different approaches have been mentioned. I'm a fan personally I'm very interested in what's happening on the ZK side. I think there's potential there, but again, there's still a ton to be proven out.
Well, when you say that they are less and less prone on doing content bets, I mean, we meet people in the blockchain gaming industry all the time, and they're like, "Oh, we're talking to so many VCs. People are interested. They want to put this. They want to put that. But it's so hard to get to our seed objectives and things like that." Like, do you think they have been? There's definitely a liquidity squeeze right now in the VC, because I believe it's just harder to raise funds, so people are being more picky on what they invest in, and that's great. That's normal cycle. But do you think the people that used to do content bets have all switched to infrastructure, because or most of them switched to infrastructure because they've been burnt by the play to earn era and the less appealing waves in NFTs and so on? How do you analyze that?
So one of the problems that we have in the Web3 space is that the moment companies launch a token or an NFT, there is this ticker that represents the market's feelings and thoughts about how well a company is doing, right? And that is a good feeling when everyone's happy and the market is up, but that becomes a bad feeling when the market is down, which we're in crypto inevitably happens at some point. And so, sometimes I've had the impressions of a lot of very crypto native investors that they were like, "Hey, I spent 1,000 hours in World of Warcraft or RuneScape. I know how to invest in games." And then, they make a bet on a degenerate team that has a cool new way to do something with NFTs. And, that's then their content bet. But making games is extremely hard. I think that, in terms of like technical digital products, there are not many things that are as complex and have as many difficult moving pieces to get together well as a game. And on top of that, it needs to be fun, which is more of an art than a science. And so making a great game that works is hard. Making a fun game that works is very hard. And so it's just really hard to do these content investments. And so, yes, Jerome, I think a lot of very crypto native VCs, investors, have burnt their hands on trying to do content bets, have now realized that it's harder than they initially thought, that their experience trading in RuneScape is not super relevant in this very complex world. And that's why they're now trying to be either like do what they understand better, which is like complex cryptographic systems, or just generally stay away from content investments.
I would love to see a correlation of crypto VCs and people that dominated the markets in RuneScape and the WoW auction house.
It's like any person that I come across in this space feels like they spent a couple 100 hours or 1,000 hours in an MMO at some point in their childhoods.
Yeah, it's basically MMO players and poker players, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, I think if you're interested in building apps, you're much better off talking to protocols than VCs. A lot of blockchains are now launching and are desperate for apps to come on board. Optimism is giving a bunch of grants. Arbitrum is giving a bunch of grants. Everybody's trying to onboard like as many apps as possible, and they're much more willing to take a risk than VCs are on the app side. Whereas usually infrastructure is a bit harder to get grants for unless it's like very specific to a specific chain. So if you're building like an app, I suggest like talking to protocols instead of VCs is probably better use of your time, at least in my experience. At least for like, getting back a bit to the discussion, like I'm super interested in ZK. I think right now there's like a lot of experiences that ZK really enables you can't really get elsewhere. There's still obviously a lot of difficulties with ZK, like how do you do this circuit updates in a way that's meaningful? How do you build large games without getting the prover size to blow up? especially around flexibility as well. Like by building something in ZK, you lose a lot of sovereignty over how your game works, because now if anybody wants to contribute the game, they also need to somehow like hook into that ZK circuit, which is not easy. And there's definitely projects looking into this, like Pixel Law is a really interesting project trying to do like these like, ZK circuits that you can also like compose and add new rules into. And so I think, for us, we're looking into ZK, but more like mixed mode ZK. So you can have like part of your game ZK, part of your game not, because there's some things like matchmaking. Like, do you really need a matchmaking system to be ZK? Like, probably not. And the less ZK you have, like the more sovereignty you have and the higher throughput you have. Especially because like if you look at ecosystems like StarkNet, like Polygon ZK VM, their TVL right now is only like 100 million approximately, and they have limited user base. And so going deep into that ecosystem obviously is hugely helpful for, being on the cutting edge of that tech and, getting grants, getting ecosystem support. So I definitely like, don't think this is a bad option. But also, right now, if you want to build a game with like a huge user base with high liquidity, like this kind of mixed mode is, I think, like currently the best option. That's kind of what we're focusing on.
What's the coolest thing you've seen in like some of these ZK use cases? I mean, to call out one of Nico's investments, Paima open sourced their like ZK based game where all the gameplay was in circuits. It was wild. They're not doing that now, but like it was awesome to see it on GitHub.
Yeah, I think like the main benefit of ZK from our perspective is trying to build better player versus environment use cases. Like as I mentioned, doing state channels for like PvP is also like a really obvious use case. So don't want to go too much into that one. I think like one thing that Onchain games are not leaning as much into as like Web2 games is player versus environment. Like if you play games like World of Warcraft, you're battling boars. With RuneScape, you're doing scaling. And right now, like Web3 games don't really have this kind of like player versus environment, despite being like a really core part of the gameplay experience. And what that leads to is that these games are hyper dependent to other players being online at the same time. And then once the game starts going down in traction, there's no other players online. There's just nothing to do, and the game just dies out. So player versus environment is like a really critical part to like keep us engaged, even if there's nobody else online to play with at the current time. But the problem with player versus environment is like, how do you do this in a way that is not cheatable, that is still like on chain, that is not too slow? And so I think like being able to use ZK to like generate proofs locally and then submit the proofs at the end is like something that's like under research at the moment, but also it's like super interesting. So this is like I think the coolest use case. And there's some stuff that we're interested in building at Paima, like really did this to have like better battle systems. Like for our battle systems right now, it's like every action you take is a transaction, which is like not super great. Not just because obviously this bloats the transactions, number of transactions for your game, but also because it means there's like a max throughput for the battle system. Like if you have like 1 second block time, it means that most you can submit 1 action per second. And there's a lot of games where like the battle system requires something that's more engaging than this. Like for example, like Final Fantasy IV, like you have like different characters that you have in your party, and they all have their own like stamina bar that they can attack when it reaches max. And the fact that there's like things happening like really fast is like one of the key parts of that battle system. Is trying to use ZK to like replicate these and doing a lot of like the computation locally is I think going to be super interesting to see how that evolves.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting discussion. So maybe if you look forward into the future, like where do you see additional like tools that engines should have? Like at the start, right, we talked about interoperability. Do you feel like game engines should offer like a tool set for that, for example? Or we talked about off-chain battle service, stuff like that. Like where do you see it developing, or is it really you have to build step by step by just building games yourself, and through that you build the infrastructure?
Yeah, I mean it's really hard for us to build a crystal ball to know what's coming up next. There's always like the typical problem. I mean for us at Paima Studios, our key bets are ZK, multi-chain NFT ownership, and concepts like storage proofs. I think like the key areas of tech that we're kind of like most interested in, as well as decentralized AI as a way to like hook that into like the player versus environment side of things. So I think those like the key areas we're currently working on. But also these are layers of theses that we've decided to make these bets. And we could be right on some of them, we could be wrong on others, and it's really hard to predict.
On our end, it's we feel like with the state of the engine as they are, we are kind of limited in doing things that are extremely ambitious in the on-chain content, but nevertheless we can do really cool, like simple game loops that are going to be effective at creating a cool experience and bringing more players onto using the chain and having a cool on-chain experience overall. And so we are trying to leverage as much as possible those easy, cool game loops that are fully on chain. So now it's a problem of content on how do you use those content on a fully on chain game, and how do you make them appealing and cool enough and create a buzz around them. And the technical piece that we're missing so far was an effective onboarding method. That's what we've been building for the past 9 months now, and we're happy with the results. Onboarding was definitely not easy, and shortcuts like taking when it's a service may create a lot of depth in your architecture. So that's where we put most of our work, and we are very happy of where we are right now and what we are going to launch soon. Hopefully, we will prove the market that it's possible to do on-chain stuff right now for the masses.
Okay, some good answers there. I mean, I think for us, it's bringing down the gap between our kind of like hacky, fully on-chain games to actual games, and everything that's in between there. So, whether that's making experiences faster, like a good example there is a year ago, our VRF was 30 seconds on Polygon, and now we're like 3-ish seconds at the worst case scenario. So like just general technological improvements to, getting in and, doing properties of things that are only possible in fully on-chain games. So that whole idea of interop and rewarding people, experimenting with models around that. We saw that one model that I mentioned before of royalties, but how do we incentivize people to create and essentially manipulate these on-chain worlds is something that we're going to start to see over the next 6 months. And then the last one is like, how can we scale these things? I think we're reaching a point right now where we're hitting the limits of the current approach that we're taking. How do we take this and 100x, the amount of players that we can have in a game?
Okay. Yeah. And thanks a lot for the discussion. I think there's probably a lot more to discuss, but yeah, I think we can end the discussion here for today. Now everyone has like 30 seconds to shill your project yourself, whatever you want, and we'll put that in the show notes.
Yeah, I can go. So at Paima Studios, we released a little over a week ago our new Onchain RPG game called Torochi. So if you want an example of like, the kind of game you can build with Paima Studios, that's like an actually large RPG game with the wallet, account abstraction, all that kind of stuff built in. Definitely check it out. It's entirely free to play. It's on testnet. So if you like games, check it out.
You can check out Cosmic Battle on Epic Game Store, Cosmic with a K on Epic Game Store. There is a tournament to this weekend with $1,000 in loot to claim. We're starting to ramp up and have the players play it out and give us feedback. Check it out. You can find it on our Discord channel, on Twitter, and so on. Cosmic with a K, Cosmic Battle.
I'm terrible at shilling. I hate doing it. We have a game at piratenation.game. You can go and play it there.
I have not much to shill, to be honest. I want to thank the 3 others for their insights, and I'm glad to be part of this. Playmint is, as already mentioned, one of our portfolio companies. Check them out. They're doing really cool stuff. And if you are building in this space, reach out to me, and we can have a chat, because I'm always interested in cool people building cool stuff on chain.
Nice. Thanks a lot, guys, and see you on the next one.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the Deus Ex DAO podcast, a place where some of the most progressive and innovative builders, thought leaders, and traders in the crypto space come together to discuss all areas of the crypto industry. Whether you're into DeFi, Layer 1s, Layer 2s, NFTs, or anything in between, we've got you covered. And as a reminder, nothing said on this podcast should be construed as financial advice or as a solicitation to buy or sell any digital asset or security. The comments, views, and opinions expressed by the hosts or guests on the podcast are their own. As always, you'll need to do your own research.